All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Excess Succeed. This is Gearface. Today, I am joined by D. D, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. Only you could help me with this evening's character. Today, we are learning about one of the finalists in the esteemed which character can get a video demonetized the fastest Grand Prix. It's Nehtali. Right now it's her and Eva, neck and neck in the running for whose character design is most egregious. Yeah, we're learning about
See,
Nehtali
also
today.
characters that made the season one card gallery on Imager show up as mature content.
As adults only, I remember that. Yeah, so this is an alt for people who don't know. We'll see a little bit of Natali's actual character design in a few minutes here. Um, but yeah, really excited to learn a little bit about Nehtali. Couple of disclaimers before we get started, as always. Number one, we're going to be talking about playing to win on this show, and that's not the only way to play Exceed. You can play Exceed for fun. I encourage you to play Exceed for fun. In fact, if you are playing Nehtali to win, first of all, that's an interesting choice. I can introduce you to the one other person I know who has played Nehtali to win, and it's D.
Hi.
It's D. That's what he's here for. But Nehtali has rotated out of competitive play. She is a season one character, so in order to really make use of what we're going to be talking about here in a tournament, you'll have to find a legacy tournament. Otherwise, stick to your kitchen table when you're playing Nehtali. That doesn't mean the stuff's not relevant. It also doesn't mean you have to play this way. The lines of play that we describe hopefully will be fun. If they don't sound fun to you, don't play that way. Second, we're going to be talking quite a bit about strategy in pretty prescriptive terms on this show. You're going to hear us say, always do this, never do that. This is always the right play. Remember that Exceed's not a solved game, and to take all that with a grain of salt. If you are the one other person in the world besides D who is intent on playing Nehtali to win, remember that these are the rules to D's strategy. They don't have to be the rules to yours. And you can come up with your own lines of play, and I encourage you to. Please tell us what we're missing about Nehtali. Show the world that
Absolutely.
she can do stuff. But yeah, all that said, D, please tell me a little bit about Nehtali.
Oh yes. Okay. So I want to start just by saying this was the first character that I picked up to learn. It's not the first character I played because there was a Princeton play of Allison Race, right? So I played the Princeton play for about 5-ish games, maybe 10. I don't know, 5 to 10 games total before I ever saw the set on a table.
Okay.
Um, then I went to Gen Con and got to play some casual games and kind of walked into the tournament and picked up whoever people had spare because I didn't have my own set at that point. Um, and got handed a few extra characters. One of them was Nehtali. And so I played Nehtali in the first Gen Con tournament for Exceed.
Really?
Yep. I did very badly. I did badly with all my characters. I was a complete scrub, but um, and in one memorable game between rounds, I was the buy, and I played against Brad, the designer of Exceed, where we were playing with Nehtali and Reese, where he was playing Reese, just because it's a buy. What are you gonna do? You're gonna play against somebody who's there.
Right.
Uh, and I got annihilated by checkmate, but that's a Reese video. That's a whole other thing. Anyway, um, um, so yes, I played Nehtali in that tournament. I don't actually remember what my team was in the next tournament. I have to go look it up. And then once season 2 came in, I had new mains that I fell so much in love with that I haven't really gone back.
Right.
But Natalia is still one of my 2 season 1 mains. And the reason that I picked her up to learn her, the reason she was one of the first characters that caught my eye, no relation to her wardrobe, was when I was watching a friend of mine play Natalia on the table. I went over to a friend's place. They were in the middle of a game, and I watched as he piloted Natalia against this other character, and I didn't know either of them. And I watched the matchup, and he struggles, and he couldn't get her to work. And I thought that was interesting. And I was thinking about what he could have done differently, and so I started to tinker. Right, no relation to Tinker Knight, but I started to experiment with the character and figure out what she does and how she works. She hooked my interest because I saw somebody fall on his face with her, and then I went, "Huh, that's not. You don't have to do that, right? Like you can actually play this character well, right? And you can." Um, So Nehtali might be so. I think you already alluded to she's a reputed low tier, right? She's a character that nobody is going to be regarding as so strong that she's bannable.
Right.
Like whatever contention there is among people in tier lists and power levels and ban-worthy and unban-worthy, nobody has ever submitted Nehtali, as far as I know, for strongest character in the game. She has been described as unreasonable. Every character in the game has been described as unreasonable. For reference, Blue and I kept track until we determined that yes, every character in the game someone had described as unreasonable.
Perfect.
So she's on that list just like everyone else. It took a while for a good break. Anyway, that's another story. But you know, she's not overwhelmingly strong. But as I constantly harp on, Exceed is a remarkably well balanced game. You can take a character who is regarded as low tier. You can take a character that people think is weak, and you can, as I did a few nights ago, pilot them against somebody playing his main, who is no slouch of a player, and go undefeated for an evening because you know what you're doing with the character that you're piloting. So Nehtali. Oh gosh. Okay. So having said all that, right? That's my introduction to this character. Is yeah, she's not spectacular. She doesn't have to be, right? You can be you can make up that difference with your skill, and also Natalia taught me how to evaluate characters in an interesting way for reasons that I'll actually have to come back to, because the next thing I wanted to say is this: she probably does have the worst ability in the game, the worst basic ability in the game. So let's read that. As an action, you may add the top card of each player's discard pile to their gauge. So you spend your turn to give you and your opponent a gauge.
Right.
So you are gaining a net advantage of nothing.
But having spent a turn, and
You
the
spent a
hope
turn.
and the hope that you can do more with your gauge than your opponent can.
Exactly, right? So that's the promise of the ability is, well, based on this, one of two things has to be true, right? Either I can make it bad for my opponent to have gauge, or it's just that good for me to have gauge.
Right.
Now, the problem with the first assumption is that people can spend gauge as force, and this is an action. So, like, you pass the turn to them, and they're like, well, if there's some reason I don't want to have gauge, I guess I don't have gauge. I'll pay force to change cards or move or, play some boost or whatever. Like, people can spend their gauge if they want to. So it's never going to be bad for the opponents to be given gauge. They will find something to do with it. So it has to be really, really good for you to have gauge. And that promise is at least to some degree fulfilled. But my claim, and we'll be going over the whole kit, my claim is that you're not going to get the mileage out of it that this suggests. This action is one of the worst actions printed on a card in Exceed. It's terrible. Don't do it. Never do this. There you go. There's my prescriptive. Never do this.
Yeah, we got one.
We got one.
Thinking about what other characters can do with their gauge, giving a Street Fighter character the ability to critical early in the game, giving a Guilty Gear character the ability to cancel, getting someone to hit a breakpoint, where now they have our good friend Ryu over here would be very thankful to have Metsushori Yuken given to him. So, like, to some extent, it would be a very, very, very high bar to reach to for your gauge's power level to make giving gauge to your opponent ever worth it. It seems like, is that correct?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
Like if we just look at the baseline of, well, it's free force that they can then spend at will. It's not too impressive. Maybe you can outweigh that, but if you look at, there's entire seasons, as you mentioned, Street Fighter and Guilty Gear, where you go, oh, every character in this season can do something awesome with gauge.
Right.
Like, are we, the lowest value of gauge in that season is still pretty high, and I've got to compete with that at minimum. And then there are characters for whom gauge is more or less precious than others. Like characters who hit really hard, like grapplers, anybody who has really inconsistent ranges and awkward issues, like characters who don't hit often tend to value their gauge more because they don't get as much of it, right? They tend to be able to make a bigger impact with their gauge. Anybody who's fought against Tager and seen 4 gauge goes, oh, I'm going to just die here in a minute, right? That's what happens when Tager gets 4 gauge.
Right, and those characters tend to be mitigated around how difficult it is to give them gauge, because the implication is that the harder it is to get gauge, the frequently the stronger you are when you get it. If you
Yeah.
are up against a character like that and you give them gauge, you are giving them the game.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of a soft concession. Like this is obviously an exaggeration, but it is a soft concession, or if you prefer, it's a taunt action to take this action against a Strive character, where you're like, yeah, I'll just do nothing on my turn and let you take twice as many turns because I'm giving you a cancel,
Right.
right?
Right.
Um, it's painful. Now, uh, I will say that you should consider using your ability, so that having considered it, you will realize it's not worth using.
Okay.
That's my claim. Now, what about the exceed mode? All right, so for 3 gauge, which we have accumulated somehow, not by this ability, we have the same ability, but you get 1 extra gauge.
Okay. So
Um,
now we are at least uh, gaining a resource over the opponent.
there's now a material advantage. There's something interesting about this, though, right? So let's do the math. So you know, I'm just gonna fill my blah, 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 discard pile. So I have 3 gauge. I spend 3. Next turn, I get 2. The opponent gets 1. Next turn, I'm now over the threshold. The opponent gets another. I'm still like only in terms of value over them. I'm like still behind where I started. If I started at 3-0. Now this is obviously imperfect because we're assuming the opponent's value of gauge is kind of a low and flat number. But like it takes about 3 turns to make up that value difference, and you already sank 1 turn on the exceed action.
Right.
So like you invested heavily on that initial opportunity cost, gambling that you are going to have 4 turns of downtime at least, that it's going to be worth taking that action so that you can build up 8 gauge up from the 3 that you had.
Right.
That's a lot of downtime.
And
Uh,
it almost sounds like it's kind of a trap that this ability is more enticing then, because now that you've exceeded, now you're going to want to use it.
yeah, if you exceed, uh, then sorry, let me put it this way. Uh, if you were to take an action printed on your character card, it would be this one. Um, it's better than the other if you believe you're going to have so much downtime that it's worth using either.
Right.
It's hard to justify using either.
Okay. Okay. So
uh,
this being better, first of all, does not mean that it's good. It does not mean that
yes.
it's worth the price to exceed. There is a conceivable universe in which exceeding as Nehtali and then using this ability several times is the correct play, but it sounds like a pretty narrow band of use cases.
I've had it happen. It's rare. It means I would say essentially it means that I'm playing against an opponent, not necessarily an opposing character, but an opponent who is taking the game at a very low tempo, at a very slow rate. They are doing very little with their turns.
Okay.
And if that's happening, I probably have several other ways I could kill them.
Right.
And that's just the way that Nehtali can kill
Right,
them.
for whatever reason you've determined in that situation, either because it sounds like fun or because it's a the correct play, that of the many ways to kill them, the one that you're selecting is the one where you passively generate gauge.
Yeah, and it's often kind of, I'll say it's kind of the easiest because it's a button that Natalia can hit where she goes, "Oh, I'm gonna you're giving me literally 6 turns to do anything I want. Sure, I can do something with that
Right.
other people can't do." Um, and she has something that she's going to be doing with that 12 gauge. Which is not a shotgun. Anyway, actually, it kind of is. Well, I don't know. Does that look like shotgun?
It's pretty shotgun shaped. That's a 212-7. Those aren't real
Two
numbers in
twelve
Exceed.
seven. Yeah, 212-7. That's one very good reason to play Natalia, by the way. 212-7.
Yeah.
It costs 5 gauge. You're not getting it from your character ability. But if you are in the unusual world where you actually think you will have the time to spam your exceed ability to mash it repeatedly, then yeah, you'll be able to throw this like 3 times. Which guess what? That's the game.
Yeah, that's the game,
Uh,
and I mean, like part of the something that you've said a few times about grapplers that we've discussed in the past, the is when they strike, they tend to make up a lot of value from the strikes that they didn't do previously. They spend a
mhm.
long time losing and not doing very much, and then they throw a haymaker, and the haymaker is worth like 3 strikes of value. That kind of looks like
Mhm.
this to me.
Why? Yes. This indeed is going to make up all the value that you didn't get from the rest of your game from the rest of the kit, because as we'll be seeing, nothing else is going to compare to this in terms of the power level, in terms of the danger, in terms of what it does to your opponent. Um, so I'm gonna briefly cut to the term Yomi layer, right? So for the audience's sake, this refers to in the rock paper scissors dynamic, right? Of, are they going to throw a fast button? Are they going to throw a counterattack? Are they going to throw a mid speed? Which thing? The Yomi layer is the layer of reading. It's what you're anticipating. Is that do you think it's an adequate explanation?
Yeah, I would say it's like in rock paper scissors. If you are positive that your opponent always throws rock the first time every time, for whatever reason, that is your read on them. But your opponent knows that you know that, so they're not going to do that. But you know that your opponent knows that you know that, and that's kind of the cycle
Yeah,
of Yomi
that
layers,
that
right?
means that you've moved up a Yomi layer when you anticipate the anticipation.
Right.
So you have to determine what layer your opponent's on. They have to determine what layer you're on. This is important to Exceed. This is important to Nehtali. This is layer 0.
Okay.
You have 5 gauge. You're at range 2, and your opponent goes, "Oh, let me check that reference again."
Yeah.
Oh,
Are,
which, by the way, if you're playing in Prince, you have to make your own reference. But anyway,
are there any
um,
are there any numbers in this character's kit that is 12 or greater besides this card? No. Uh,
nope.
I assume that Hell Salvation is coming my way if I'm at range 2 and you have 5 gauge.
Yep.
Okay.
It is the threat. It is the telegraph. It is the reason your opponent will try not to stand at range 2 on your turn when you have 5 gauge.
Right.
Um, they will go, "Oh, range 2 is not a good place for me to be. Practically any other range is a better place to be, because then I'm not dealing with this." Um, which well, so yeah, so let's talk layer 0. At range 2, obviously you're threatening this once you have 5 gauge. Um, when your opponent knows you're threatening this, well, you have this other very good card that tends to beat things that they would play against Hell Salvation. Um, because the answer to Hell Salvation is block.
Is block, right? And you are because you can't cross out. You can't. It's a DP. It's a DP that hits for 12.
Yep,
You block this.
yep. Um, Now they may try to parry, and that tends to be what makes the game run longer. Is when, if this gets parried and you have to start thinking about how you're going to go through your reshuffle to get it back, because you will need this card.
Right.
Um, like, but if they parry, okay, one block down, one health salvation down, I can still get another one, and if it doesn't run into the other block, I'm still getting the value that I needed. Like, you should expect to land this at least once per game. If you land it twice, you have won.
You've already
Like,
won. Sure.
but like, expecting to land this once is key, and then making sure it actually happens is what we're talking about now. Where, like, this is the first thing they expect. If they learn to deal with it, then they're holding block, which means you can spike them.
Right.
Um, and if they hug range 1 or hug range 3, whoop, no, I put it over here. This boost is what we're doing next, which
Okay.
says we're actually at range 2. Sorry, you're dead.
Right. Okay.
Um, so how you land Self Salvation. You hit with it, you hit with it, or if they decide you're going to hit with it, you don't hit with it, and then you hit with it later.
Right. And now you are preserving the threat for later, and they're one block down. Hopefully.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. At least one of the games that I won, the thing I mentioned earlier, was me never actually playing Hell Salvation and just throwing Spike.
Right. The
Because
the
yeah,
reason that you would call it layer 0 is that it is the bedrock on which all of your other mix-ups are coming from, right? Like
yes,
there's no reason for you to ever land Spike unless your opponent is terrified enough to block all the time. Oh, look, here's I'll make them terrified to block card.
yeah. This
Okay,
this this is the dominant threat. It is the thing around which everything is built.
got it.
Most important card in the kit by a significant margin.
Okay, so
Uh,
this is the game plan so far.
yep.
Okay,
And then being, you know, so having established this, I actually think that's like one of the less interesting parts of playing Nehtali, because it's just a big dumb stat stick. The fun comes when the opponent knows that it exists and you start having to maneuver around it,
right.
and then it's dealing with the timing of anticipating when they have block. You have your own parry, you have your own reading. These are information related normal boosts, which you can use to get information about the contents of the opponent's hand, potentially to knock out an important card. If they have block, then like block. Sorry, if they have parry, then like block. Um, you're not generally terribly worried about scramble. You might be worried about reading. Everybody is. Reading's pretty dangerous. Um, and you're always a little concerned about block. But there's, like I said, there's you have spike for block. You don't necessarily have to kill block, but parrying a block is actually net value for you. You both, if you succeed, then you both lose a block, but you still have health salvation. Um, and if you fail, then you have a lot of hand information. And since reading is in your deck, your opponent has to worry about that.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, so the first thing is health salvation exists. Please be aware, health salvation exists. You may now be wondering, okay, well it says 5 gauge though, and if I'm not using my ability, how am I getting 5 gauge?
I was about to ask, how realistic is this to build to?
And the answer is virtually guaranteed. Actually, I will say it's guaranteed if you want it to be. This is why I put the cards in this order. I forgot why I did it. Here's a boost. It's called Gauge Boost. It says add this to your gauge, so it's a gauge boost.
It seems like it boosts my gauge, D.
It's an extremely self-explanatory card. Yes.
Wow.
This is the original key charge for those who
Yeah.
played Street Fighter.
Wow. I'm glad that they didn't maintain that naming scheme for the rest of season 1 Exceed, so that we would have my fastest normal move the opponent 1 or 2 spaces, or
Oh,
my
it's
second
the
fastest normal
retreat
retreat
normal.
3.
Yep. The discard boost, that sort of thing.
Yeah, of course.
Yep.
All right, so I'm taking, as you're describing this game plan here, the fact that this card is already turned sideways, and the fact that when you flipped this card over, you started talking about a boost, makes me think that I don't really need to pay super close attention to the top halves of these cards.
Some of them are going to be more relevant than others. Actually, the reason I said it's guaranteed if you want it to be is because of the attack on this card. This attack hits.
Oh, okay.
It does not hit at range 8, but this attack is 1 to 7 to 7. This, by the way, is the original gauge special. It's not a force special, and it doesn't have any validation clauses, but it is a thing that works, but it doesn't have power unless you spin gauge or if you have a boost in play. By the way, you will probably have a boost in play. These go well together.
I mean, like the speed curve doesn't even exist at range 7, but if it did, 7 would be above curve.
Yes.
Yeah, like dramatically above curve.
Yes, this is faster than the fast projectiles. It's faster than the fastest fast projectiles. 7 is not generally a speed that shows up out at range. Like there's a handful of ways to hit speed 7 at range 4, and then beyond that, it's really absurd exceptional cases.
Yeah, even in the kind of Wild West landscape of season 1 Exceed, where everybody had all sorts of crazy projectiles flying all over the place, a 1 to 7 range band is also quite exceptional.
Yes, it hits everywhere. It hits the entire board except for the opposite edge if you're literally at the opposite edge of the arena, which shouldn't generally happen, but hypothetically could if you're getting really, really zoned by Sagat, I guess, or
Sagat, right.
But it's usually not going to be a thing. So it hits at most relevant ranges, and in particular, it is speed 7, so it's a reversal, right? It's a DP, as we called it earlier, Dragon Punch. So it means that people have to be at least slightly cognizant of it at all the ranges where they want to play stuff that is otherwise on curve. We're like, okay, your opponent's assaults is never quite safe. Your opponent's cross, never quite safe. Your opponent's dive, yeah. Like, you have something that is the answer to any fast button they would hit because it's faster.
Right. So
that's an extremely useful property to have.
So essentially, you would, if it is your turn, by default, you're sort of mentally turning this card sideways. But if it's your opponent's turn, frequently, it might be useful to throw Soul Thresher.
Yeah. This is and it's a defensive threat that you want to exist in their head as well, even if you're not. Don't play it always, right? But play it often enough that they know it exists.
That they know it exists.
Like,
and also,
you got to catch them out sometimes.
In all the game states before you have 5 gauge, you might not actually need Clutch of Evil that badly because you might not be confirming something as scary as Hell Salvation.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Like this boost is for when you need to confirm Hell Salvation, and the counterplay they chose is range 1, range 3.
Right.
and there's a few specific exceptions to that, but I'll mention that when we get to that boost. But yeah, so this boost is for confirming this attack. It is seldom for confirming spike because you're expecting that to be for the other counterplay where they decided to be at range 2 because they believe that they can deal with it.
Right.
Um, like this is for they probably are not holding block for this. They're instead hugging range 1 or 3. So let me shift you back in range.
The counterplay they chose was range 1 or range 3, not anything else.
Yeah, at least most likely, you know. Once you both have experience in the matchup, once your opponent has played against Nehtali enough, they will start to decide how they want to try to handle redundancy. That's when you start to decide when you want to throw your readings and your parries and manipulate their which you also have a range 1 spike, but we'll get to that. Oh yeah, so Soul Thresher is an important attack. It is, a ridiculously huge ranged reversal. It's faster than your opponent's buttons. Loses to counterattacks, but doesn't actually require you to spend gauge on it, which means that if you know that you won't stun them, you can decide to just go gauge positive instead of spending gauge plus 2 power. Whether that's worth it is entirely life math. Like it is, look at what life threshold they're going to be at, decide if it's worth spinning a gauge. Look at what gauge threshold you're going to be at, decide if it's worth spinning a gauge. And that math is far too situational to cover here.
Of course.
Um,
Okay.
But like, you get to make that decision. That's nice that you get to make the decision. It doesn't pre-commit you. Now this attack is not at all important. This attack is one that, if Nehtali fulfilled part of her promise, which is that I use gauge better than you possibly could, then we look at a card like this thinking, oh yeah, that's how, right?
Right.
Like she's amping up 10 million gauge and she's going to hit me for literally 10 damage. And yeah, I may have slightly exaggerated the amount of gauge there, but it's the first issue is like getting that much gauge without using your ability is going to be difficult. The second issue, and to be clear, that much gauge here is at least 7. Because until you hit 7, this is not even a card that matters. Like,
right. I mean, the return on investment, like not looking at anything else about the fact that you're spending gauge by playing an ultra or anything, like 1 power for 1 gauge.
Now, it doesn't spend, notably. Like,
exactly,
this is
right.
just passive.
Right. But just looking at the math, 1 power for 1 gauge is quite a bit less than what Hell Salvation is giving you for 5 gauge.
Yes, that's 2.2 power per gauge instead of 1.
Right.
Yeah. And you won't mind that you spent it if, you actually got that value out of it. Hellfire doesn't spend it, but on the other hand, as far as guard breakpoints go, like, you're speed 4, which means you are a mid-speed. You're under curve even at range 3.
Right.
I guess you can EX to be on curve, if you desperately need it. Yeah, you can do that. In order to stun the counterattacks that are relevant at that range, well, that's basically sweep. At ranges 1 and 2, you might also have to worry about focus. You only stun sweep if you have 7 power, so you need at least 6 gauge if you're going to EX this, and 7 if you're not EXing it. Like, if it was just 1 to 3, 6, 4, 1 to 3, 5, 4, something like that, we would look at it as like, okay, well, this is not a particularly good mid speed. This is just kind of a thing that hits for a chunk of damage. And if you were playing this as an attack, I should say, when you wild swing this, that's often what this card is.
Right.
This is dealing 3 to 5 damage, or getting stunned.
Or it's getting stunned. Right. It's a mid speed.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, like it's a mid speed. It's either losing clean or it's doing some damage. However, it's a mid speed that doesn't beat counterattacks. Okay. In almost all cases, which means you have a card that beats no corner of the triangle. I tend to call those bad cards.
Yeah, you already, in order to make this work, you need to have more gauge than you would need to run your game plan. That doesn't mean you won't ever have 6 or 7 gauge, but if you have 5,
if you did, for one thing, you probably got there by boosting this,
right?
And for another, if you had 5, you probably were going to spend it before you got to 7,
right? Right. Okay. So there's really not any point to Hellfire.
It is a card that wants to be something that you really that I recommend against.
Okay.
Right. It's the card that says, oh, you are in fact doing the thing where you are exceeding and getting 12 gauge and giving your opponent 6 gauge.
Right.
A very narrow use case. Far better generally to boost this. In some instances, just depending on maybe it was at the bottom of your deck, like both copies, then you might be able to look at this and go, oh, I have an EX Hellfire and I actually do have 6 gauge. Okay, that becomes a cool card. But most of the time you'll see it earlier in the game and then you should just boost it.
Sure. Okay. In order to get Hell Salvation online faster.
Yep. Exactly. All right. Okay, what did I put next? Oh yeah, here's a boost. Yeah, please read that boost.
All right, so the value proposition on this and everything we were talking about this about the resource advantage here and how it's a bad idea to give your opponent gauge and but look at how much a Street Fighter character can do with a critical. Making your
Hey, now
opponent
you can take it away.
yeah, making your opponent get rid of a gauge sounds pretty awesome given everything we were just saying at the start of the lesson.
Yes. So this boost I think is actually what really makes Nehtali feel like Nehtali. Because this character, thematic standpoint, right? This is a succubus. She's a temptress. She's somebody who promises you power and then uses it against you.
Right.
Well, that doesn't really work with how her ability works because you can just use it as force. Do whatever you will. She can't turn it against you easily. Which is another card that I'll show you in a minute. Two other cards actually that try to do that don't really work. But what she is deceitful. What she is lying, cheating, stealing, and this feels so nasty. In the event that you desperately need a gauge threshold and you decide to use your basic ability once to hit that gauge threshold, because I do want to mention later that the reason to use your ability, even when it's not worth it in the long run, not worth it from a value proposition, like you might use your ability because you need exactly one more gauge and it's worth it. Like you might be at 4 gauge and at range 2 and go, okay, I it's worth giving my opponent 1 gauge to turn on Hell Salvation. Um, like that can happen. And like this is your consolation for that. This is your okay. If you gave your opponent something, take it away.
Take it away again, and then get more gauge in the process.
Yeah. But with all that said, as you said earlier, right? It's better if we just get the chance to say, oh, actually, that first gauge that you wanted to be able to cancel or critical, or that, last gauge that you, or that gauge that you used with fail off, so that now you can use your exceed ability, which is super scary and cost gauge. Actually, no.
Right.
Just turn it off. It's dead.
Right. So you could be giving them the ability to use something and then taking away that ability, but ideally they've given themselves the ability through their own hard work to get some gauge, and then you took that away.
And then rip it out from under them. Yes.
Right. Yeah. That feels much meaner.
Yes. So that's by far how I recommend. Soul Exchange is it's also just, I mean, because of how it interacts with so many characters and their specific needs for gauge and specific thresholds, like one of the strongest special boosts in the game. It's ridiculous that you can take away somebody's gauge completely unattractively, not even at no cost. You get a gauge for doing it.
You get something from it, right? And this is on a 0 cost special boost.
Yep. So yeah, gauge boost is good. This is vastly better.
Right.
Holy cow, this is so much better. Mash this boost. I'll say mash it every chance you get. That is mostly true. This attack does have a use case. So unlike Hellfire, we'll look at this as a real attack, although it has some glaring weaknesses, right? This is speed 1 and has no armor, no guard, no stun immunity. This is because it is very specifically an anti-projectile button, right? Attacks at range 4 don't hit you. So at range 4, this is a thing that says your projectiles don't hit me.
Right.
The problem that often comes up is that there's a fair number of characters who have like some sort of fast poke, but aren't running the full spectrum of projectile attacks. So like if you're up against somebody who has fast, mid, and slow projectiles, someone like Sagat, someone like Axel, someone who is actually running the full mix-up of the projectile meta at range, then this attack can be relevant, especially holding 1 copy can be relevant just to make them respect that you have it.
Just to make them not be at range 4, in the same way that they don't want to be at range 2 for Hell Salvation, just much less so.
Yes. And like it got hard for people to maintain range 5+, which means that they're going to have to decide if they are going to come in and risk Hell Salvation or stand at a range where you have a really annoying mix-up component that just shuts down their projectiles. But against a bunch of characters, you already have this, and that's enough.
Sure.
Like you can throw Fierce out, and now you're holding a speed 7 4 power. That's going to deal with a lot of projectiles. It's going to deal with basically all fast projectiles. It will not deal with counterattacks.
And this conveniently at range 4, this would also deal with dive just fine.
Yes, exactly. Which this does not.
Right. Okay. So if they have low Tiger Shot, if they have a guarded projectile that they'd be willing to throw at range 4, this could be very relevant. Otherwise, if they're just repping fast fireballs, you're fine with just throwing Soul Fresher.
You already have Soul Thresher to answer those, which means you can just mash Soul Exchange. And you'll almost certainly play at least one Soul Exchange, even against somebody who is very, very good against projectile zoning, because the value of Soul Exchange is just so high.
Right.
Like on the one hand, yeah, you could probably play through Darkness Barriers into Axel and spare yourself 4 to 12 life, or sorry, 8 to 12 life, and hit him for 10. But also, you can like delay him exceeding for 2 turns and turn off his cancels, and you get wins a lot of other ways by doing that sort of thing. So
Right.
the value is still going to be really, really high playing this at least once.
Okay. Sure, makes sense.
But yeah, so mostly a boost. Does have a niche as an attack, but mostly a boost.
Okay.
But yeah, so 2 gauge, 2 gauge, hits if we want it to. We're at 5 gauge, and we haven't even played block. We haven't even played on curve normals.
Yeah,
Like,
and some of these were completely uninteractive.
right?
We just get to do this on a turn.
Yeah, like these are going to happen when you want them to happen. This obviously only works if the opponent has gauge. Oh no, I wouldn't worry. You'll find a chance to use it. If you don't find a chance to use this, then you are thrashing your opponents.
Right.
So
Imagine the mindset of the opponent who is looking to counterplay Soul Exchange by never getting gauge.
yeah,
Like
exactly.
they want it too. They'll have it. You can get rid of it.
Exactly. Like, and they will just have to suck it up and deal with it.
Right.
Unless they decide to parry this card, if they have parry, and if they do, okay, cool, they parried this. They didn't parry Hell Salvation.
Hell Salvation sounds
Right.
great. That's one block
Awesome.
down.
Yeah, that's one block down. Yeah, just we're going to get 5 gauge if we want it. There's no question here, right? We already have it, and we haven't even talked about how you do generate gauge normally through the use of normals.
Yeah, I mean, I've never played Nehtali and Exceed before, but I have played characters who don't have these tools and were able to hit 5 gauge.
Yep.
I've hit 5 gauge with Tager. Like, it'll happen.
Yeah, exactly. Like you'll get there if you're not spending your gauge on other stuff. You can just you'll get there. It's unless you're getting completely thrashed, it's going to take you at least that many hits to kill your opponent. You'll get there.
Sure.
All right. So what else have I concealed from our view? Well, this is an interesting card. So this is the range 1 spike. It is a range 1 and 2 ignore armor. It almost looks like a sweep like. It is actually worse than sweep with the because it does not hit range 3, so at range 1 it loses to grasp, depending on the board state. But, as you probably should be expecting based on how I've been going through all these cards, let's read the boost.
Yep. Hey, I know this boost.
Hey, you should. Yeah, this is the original Switch Destruction. Nehtali had it first.
Okay. So Equus, Sagat, the other characters owe a debt to Nehtali.
Yep. She was the first one to have this boost.
Interesting.
And it's at the same effective cost. Now hers is on a special. It's 2 force instead of 1, but because it's not on an ultra, it's on a special.
Right.
But it's generally easier for her to pay this cost than for other people to pay this cost. Now there's a few things fighting against each other in this card. However, this is her range 1 spike. Well, if you have +4 speed in play, your opponent is going to go, okay, I want to be not at range 2 or 3 where you have a speed 7 spike. So I'm going to go to range 1. Well, great, you have a range 1.
You'd really love to play Volt Damnation then.
Wait a minute, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
That can be awkward. You do have this and another boost if you decide that this is the time to confirm a spike, but you usually save this boost for Hell Salvation.
Right.
Most commonly, you're just going to be playing footsies. You're just going to be doing good old-fashioned walk actions where you pay a force to move around, boost runs, get out of the corner, that sort of thing, to keep the threat of your speed 7 spike live, or possibly your speed 7 die, but usually your speed 7 spike. That's typically how this plays out. If they do block you at range 1, however, don't feel too bad about this. You still got to hit them with like a sweep or something, probably just a free sweep where they blocked and ate some resource loss, and then that's a block down, which is still good for you.
Yeah, that still works.
That's one fewer block for your actual haymaker, because spike is nice. Speed 7 spike is something that people are going to look at and go, I can't possibly do anything about that, and they're right. But it hits for 5, not 12.
Not 12. Yeah, that's less than 12.
Yep.
I'm also noticing that of all of the cards that we have on the table, except for this one, all of them are instant boosts.
Yep.
Is this by default
the continuous boost, and it's tech bait? Yeah, this is tech bait.
Okay.
100%. This is the thing where people go, oh, if this hits the board, I need to play my discarded boost from play boost, whether it's Tech, Ukemi, or Tech Hits. I think is the other one, right?
Yeah,
Um, not,
season 6. Yep.
yep. But yeah, like they're going to go, oh, if they don't read your kit in advance, if they don't know what they're getting into, then they might not do that, and they'll go, oh, what in the world do I do about this? I can't do anything about this.
Right.
But if they know in advance, then they'll be holding their dives. You can, in fact, use that to your advantage. If you get into a boost war, you play lights, and they don't contest, it's probably because they are saving for their next boost war where they know that this will come out and they can't do anything with it.
Right.
You can then use reading, things like that. It's also like, how do I put this? This getting teched is only technically bad for you. Like it's a tempo loss. It's not. I can't make any claim that it's good for you. However, accept it. It is a thing where if they are dealing with it, then they are committing that resource to that. Now you have a lights that you can play. You can tech their light if they have lights. You'll be one boost up in the overall boost war because they probably don't have this boost.
Right.
If they do have this boost, then you're probably going to go even in a boost war where that's their tech bait and this is yours. Like you are one boost up in your kit because you have access to a thing that other people have to tech, which means that you can then play an uncontested light or an uncontested fierce.
Because frequently light is already a tech bait boost for characters who don't have something like swift destruction. Like this is plenty scary. I would love to not have to ever worry in the same way that like Ryu doesn't really have to worry very much about having his lights teched because he has Way of the Warrior. It's not great when they get teched, but you're like, yeah, okay, I got some normal boosts. I can play those for free.
Yes. Yeah. It's like, okay, I'm not happy that I got teched. It was not a good thing. However, I knew going in that was going to happen, or that was likely to happen, and I accept that this being teched is, it helps give me the overall neutral edge that I don't have this strike, but I still have in the long term game plan because now they're down a tech and I'm not down a light.
Got it.
So like, don't feel too bad about it. It's not the end of the world. It's going to happen. It's going to get teched. When it doesn't, and you get a free win, cool, take it. Like that's great. Your go-tos are spike at range 2 or 3, dive at range 3 if you're so inclined, although it's often better to save dives so that you can maintain that tech war advantage. Or, like I said, just range 1 sweep, which, yes, technically puts you down a light, but it's worth it. Like, hitting a sweep with block, or hitting a block with sweep is a win for you at that point.
Right. Okay.
And you can also cross away if you really expect them to be playing a focus or a sweep instead of a block.
And so for Volt Damnation, the attack, we've been calling it a range 1 spike. The fact that the major use case for our actual copy of Spike is to beat the thing that will beat or trade with Hell Salvation. Is this often frequently just another range 2 spike then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, this is my spikes are down, so they are not afraid of them, and they're willing to block Hell Salvation, and they didn't think about this.
Okay.
Or, I didn't draw my spikes, but I did draw my Volt Damnation, and I have determined that they are blocking this Hell Salvation, so I will throw Volt Damnation, and they will.
Right. Okay. So range 1 spikes are cool, and many characters. The reason that we call it a range 1 spike is because many characters are looking at this card because it covers a use case that the real spike doesn't. But for Nehtali, the redundancy of having 2 range 2 spikes is actually really, really important.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And yeah, so when I call this range 1 spike, it's because that's a property of the card. It's actually way less important for Nehtali than most people, not only for the reasons you said, but also, like, let's look at the stats. Speed 1, it is slower than sweep.
Right.
It's 5 power, it's not focus.
I'm sorry, it's only going to trade. It's not going to ever win clean.
Yeah. It will trade with sweep focus, and it will only beat block.
Right.
So, like, that's not doing the job that range 1 spikes need to do to be terrifying. Like, the reason people are afraid of range 1 spike is because they can't play their safe, reliable range 1 stuff.
Right.
And that's not actually true here. So it's nice to have. It is nice specifically because it means that a block can't diffuse, some other boost setup that you might have in play. A Fierce Volt Damnation can be pretty scary. It is nice to have another speed, like another 6 guard, but I'll talk about the specials as a whole in a minute.
Okay.
But yeah. Okay, so that's Volt Damnation. As an attack, it's unremarkable, but it is nice to have another Ignore Armor option. So the spike's not the only one. Another range 2 Ignore Armor option. But mostly, I think you're going to be seeing Swift Destruction because it gives you a neutral edge. Well, it either wins neutral now or it gives you a neutral edge long term.
Right.
Like the job of Swift Destruction as a boost is to say, actually, this neutral exchange is over and I'm winning. Like that's what it does. It ends boost wars. It ends neutral in a very dramatic fashion.
Sure. Yeah. There's not a lot that many people can do about +4 speed except tech it.
Yep.
Okay.
That's the thing. Okay, I think this is the last special. All right. So 1, 2, 3, 5. So we're under curve. This is a mid speed. Before maybe +3 power, but probably not. Hit push 3. That's important.
Yeah. All right. So unlike Hellfire, whose mid speed capability is locked behind quite a bit of gauge, this is already a mid speed, even if I don't get my before effect.
Yep. This beats sweep at range 1. You just push 3 and they miss.
Right.
And that's extremely useful.
Right. That's great.
Yep. The +3 power is, super, super nice. In the unusual event that you actually get a chance. So I'll say most people playing against Nehtali are going to read this card and also this card, which we'll show in a minute, and go, oh, I'm not going to be building up a million gauge against you because that would be a bad idea. And so they'll be spending their gauge to do useful things, as I said, people do. So you're probably not going to get this, but in the event that you do get that, you're hitting for 6 at speed 5, which is very good. You might be EXing it to hit for 7 at speed 6, which is completely insane.
Yep, that's great.
Yeah, but most of the
that's
time,
an ultra.
yeah, that's nuts. That's an ultra. Most of the time, however, you're expecting this to be the thing that beats sweep at range 1 and it beats a clean, which is a very, very useful property.
Sure.
It's an extra cross. It's a reverse cross, as it were.
Right. Okay.
This boost is very expensive. 2 force, retreat 2, and strike. It's more expensive than it looks even, right? Because striking means that you're spinning another card and not drawing for a turn. So
right.
This is very, very expensive. And by default, you'll expect this to put you at range 3 or greater, right? You're like, all right, well, I'm going from range something to range something. That second range is probably going to be 3 or higher, unless my back is to the wall. That's not the range where Hell Salvation hits. It's therefore much less exciting for us.
Sure.
It is hypothetically the way to set up the other Ultra, which is the longer range button. In practice, what this actually is for this board state. Or occasionally for making a ton of space against somebody who doesn't have a projectile. But it is the much more expensive version of Clutch of Evil, which says, I'm hitting with Hell Salvation.
Specifically when you are almost cornered at range 1.
Yep. It backs you to range 2 unless you strike immediately.
So that you can't back up enough to make range 3. You will end at range 2.
Yeah, retreat 1 and strike is better, and it doesn't cost you a copy of Soul Thresher, which is actually the reason that this is even worth considering how much more expensive it is.
Sure.
Like, it's more expensive, except it costs you Azazel's Torment, which is a nice card, and not Soul Thresher, which is a card that you need your opponent to be afraid of.
Right. Okay, I see. So outside of the expense on this is such that the only thing that could be worth confirming would be Hell Salvation. If I'm playing the Swift Destruction Spike, they moved to range 1 minigame, I'm taking the walk action. I'm not taking the retreat 2 and throw spike action.
Yeah, you may well, I'll say I'll leave that to you in the sense that it's if you really want to confirm that value, then you can. Let me add this. This is 2 force, and that is convenient because you have an excellent source of 2 force, which is this next card that we'll talk about in a minute.
Okay.
So if you want to use this to confirm a dive or a spike, or if you just want this to get out of jail against something horrifying, where you're the one being pressured by some horrible boost setup, and they don't have projectiles, so you need to just not be where you are. Sure, you use it like that. It's an expensive tool, so it's a tool that's often going to be kind of obvious when it's like, oh, I have to use this, because you're not going to want to use it most of the time.
Right.
When it's the thing that you need, it's the only thing that will do.
Right. They have exactly five life left, and I'm in that exact situation. I need to end the game right now.
Yep. It's like, well, then I have the tool for it, and it's worth it because the game is over.
The game is over.
And
sure.
I don't care how many cards I have left.
Right. Okay.
But yes. All right. So speaking of 2 force, I'm being a little bit unfair. This card is actually better than that, but not much. So here is another card that tries to weigh in on the Nehtali promise. +2 power for each card in your opponent's gauge. And boy, if you can make them hold gauge, that could be really scary.
Right.
Because there are people who like to have 4, 5, 6, 8 gauge. I have in fact hit a Hakumen for 22 damage, I think.
Wow. That's
Um,
yeah, that's a lot of damage. I was about, as soon as you started talking about it, I was starting to think of characters who really, really like Gage, and I started to think about the Hakumen matchup.
yep. He didn't die. He played Yukikaze,
That's
but
so
nonetheless. And the fact that he played Yukikaze and still had that much gauge should give you a sense of how silly that game was. But anyway,
fair point.
I was in exceed mode. So for most purposes, this is not going to be a very powerful attack. It's going to be hitting for 2 to 6 damage, which it's range 3 to 5 and speed 5. That still might be useful. You still might need a speed 5 projectile. The aftermove one is actually deceptively useful. This is a thing where like you get just a little board control, and you're often going to be using this in response because you're not expecting. Can I put this? If you're expecting a projectile that's fast enough or an attack that's fast enough to stop this, then you'll beat it with this.
Right.
So you're playing this against the slower thing. So like this is another way to beat sweep at range 3. This is another an option to beat dive that costs a bit more gauge, but nonetheless works. And at range 4, you don't even have to. It can be a 0 power attack and still work. I don't love doing that, but it is better than getting hit for 5 damage and not being able to do anything about it. It does have the use case of you're at range 3 and you go to range 2 and now you're at range 2 and you're scary, but I find that not to generally be a realistic use case because you just spent 3 gauge.
You would need 8.
You probably
well,
don't.
you
probably don't.
You'd be building some, but still.
Yeah, so you get 1 back. So it's but even then, it's like okay, that's probably not going to happen. It's also probably not going to happen because if you're going from range 3 to range 2, then they didn't play a counter attack, and that's not usually the use case that I'm playing this in. Like I'm usually playing this at range 3 to not get hit by something with guard.
Right. Sure.
As an evasive maneuver. I also played at range 4 or 5 where I'm like, oh, they're playing something that is not the appropriate thing to be dealt with by soul thresher. I can hit with this, maybe deal some actual damage depending on how much gauge they have. You can get a little bit of value in off this fairly often. So it has use cases. The boost also has a use case. This one does not say take another action and does not say strike. It is, I'll say it's free. It's on an ultra, but 0 for instant force cost. Pushing out to range 4 is also like not the worst for you because you do have a kind of annoying range 4 setup as we've seen, where you have the thing that beats most projectiles and the thing that beats most anything else. So Begone is fine for buying you time. The attack, you will find situations in which it is an attack your opponent can't do much about. You will probably never be able to make it into the awesome payout that it wants to be. There are opponents who will just not be attentive to it and rob them blinds is my advice there. If somebody leaves themselves open to getting hit for 8 by this, then do it. Squish them.
Sure.
Just don't expect that opportunity to come by very often. People will usually be spinning their gauge.
This is kind of taking into account the counterplay before we get to the counterplay, which is just that like a realistic opponent who's read your kit is not going to give you this. So you'll use it when you can use it because if they've been inattentive or if they need the gauge that badly, they'll accept it as a cost of doing business. But it also sounds like your gauge threshold, your opponent's gauge threshold at which you will consider using this card is actually 0 if you can use it to dodge a sweep or something dangerous.
It is for me, yes.
Okay. So
as wild as that sounds, I'll play this as a 0 power attack. Or I should say, when I play this, I am seldom considering that I'm going to get much power out of it, because I just expect my opponents to be playing around it.
Right.
It's like so the way that I perceive this card at baseline is not as a 6 or 8 power payout. It is as a 0 power like utility button.
Right. And that might not be, that is clearly not as good as an 8 power above curve attack, but that doesn't mean it's completely useless.
Yes.
Okay.
And it is so I find it's often unrealistic to plan for 2 Hell Salvations. It's great if I can plan on 2 of them, but that's not going to happen. What is likely to happen is that I will have enough gauge for Hell Salvation and Heaven's Punishment. Like I'm not likely to hit the 10 that I want and the game still be going, but I'm fairly likely to get to 8s. Um, and so it's often like I can find a time to use Heaven's Punishment where it is useful enough to be worth playing because it also isn't really costing me a Hell Salvation.
Got it.
Um, and if that sounds like I'm getting an absurd amount of gauge, yes, I went over the kit earlier. You're getting
Yeah.
6 more gauge than your opponent, give or take, depending on the opponent, because +1, +1, +2, +2.
Right.
It's a little bit silly. And you
And
do
also,
want to be
and
spending
also,
it.
many of your attacks are not hitting that hard, except for the ones that are. So
Oh yeah, you're
even the
pillow
little
fisted.
hits that you're getting here and there are giving you gauge and not meaningfully progressing your opponent's life total. You might wind up with quite a bit of gauge just through normal play.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. All right. Yeah, but all that said, more commonly than either of those 2 use cases, I think I pay this as 2 force.
Okay.
Either on Swift Destruction or on this boost, usually Swift Destruction, or change cards or walk. Like it's force. Having force is good. It is not even a bad thing for you to have a card that is designated force, because, well, you need to have strong fundamentals to play Nehtali. Yeah, because as I've talked about all these tools, so I've said I was going to go over the specials as a whole. So your specials are not your game plan. That should be obvious by now. Your specials are not really going to generate enough value for you to win a game. You have to really squint even to get like 20 damage out of these gathered specials. It's not easy. So your the backbone of your play is the normals. And while fundamentals are important for everybody and everybody should know how to use the normals, it's particularly important for you. And therefore, the way to view your specials is as filling in holes and going, what does this do that the normals don't?
Right.
Because if you're mostly playing normals, it's vitally important that you understand how your tools are different from the normals. Because to paraphrase my friend Blue, if somebody playing against me is only playing normals, then I'll never lose to them. Right? Like if I know that you're only playing normals, then I know what your options are, and there's only 8 of them.
Right.
Like I can find ways to crush you because you will be limited. You've hamstrung yourself.
Right.
So
Even if all of
mhm.
these cards, even if all these specials are strictly worse than your normals, they're not. But even if they were strictly worse than your normals, or just lower power in general than your normals, you need like having them in your kit means that your opponent needs to deal with twice as many options or 5 more options. Okay.
Right. So if they're playable at all, then you need to understand how they're playable so that you know when to use them. That fills in holes in what the normals allow.
Right.
Um, so we talked about them all individually. I'm going to go over them very briefly. Um, Typically not a card. It is specifically an on curve EX at range 3 in rare cases, but legitimately, honestly, typically not an attack. Um, Range 1 beats sweep. Range 2 beats sweep. Range 2 beats spike. Um, Initiating EX beats everything but focus. Like these are useful
Yeah,
properties.
those are real use cases, especially on a card with a very expensive boost that you'd prefer not to have to play.
This is an attack that you're not going to be throwing out, you know, any other way other than as force or to try to beat one of those things.
Right.
Um, and it's not even particularly common that you're going to lose cleanly on it because, especially if you're initiating, um, because people crossing out against Nehtali is very rare. Like only a quote unquote true zoner, only somebody with a bunch of projectiles is going to play cross against Nehtali, because most people are going to go, oh, I want to go to range where I can get hit by Soul Thresher and do nothing about it, or I can get hit by Heaven's Punishment and do nothing about it, or I can get hit by Darkness Barrier and not be able to do anything. Okay, why am I doing this? Like they're going to try to be in your face, punching you to death, which is another good reason to pay attention to your normals, by the way, because normals work at range 1-3.
Yeah, I was actually gonna ask about that because you do have like your game plan is range 2, but you have a lot of things that are ranged buttons. What is your what is your preferred range? It sounds like in actuality, the preferred range is where your normals are going to hit, partially because hey, that's where a lot of your utility is going to come from, but also partially that's because that is what your opponent's going to let you have.
Yeah, like it is your range is 2, 4, 1 in some combination, and here's why. Um, well, 2 is because Hell Salvation exists.
Right.
If health salvation doesn't exist, your favorite range actually isn't necessarily 2. I would say generally, if health salvation is offline because you don't have the gauge and you're not even close to it, then 1 is better because at 1 you can play block, you can play focus, you can play sweep, and you can play as blah, 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 this card,
Yep.
torment. Um, and that means that you have counterattacks that beat by default everything except for cross. A thing that beats your opponent's sweep.
Right.
And then, like, in theory, you have grasp if your opponent were to play a cross, but you also don't really care if your opponent plays cross.
So going back to what you were saying about like what does what do your specials fill in the gaps in your normals? There are no meaningful range 1 mid speeds among the normals, but you have one.
Yes.
Okay.
You have 1.5. You know, you can beat your opponent's block. It's just that we're more concerned about this as its role in your game plan, not as it's like filling in
It's
your
status as a
fundamental.
card. Right.
Yeah. But yeah, so like this is a range 1, you know, thing that beats sweep, which is important.
Right.
So like you have that, and also range 1 normals you can play relatively conservatively and reliably and defensively and not lose a ton of life on risky exchanges. This is important. You need to draw the game out until you can get Health Salvation online and wallop them for 12. Like, you can't afford to let yourself die by mixing 5, 6 mix-ups in a row before you can land Health Salvation.
Right.
So, you know, much as I hate to say it, right? Don't engage in that many mix-ups. Play more conservatively, play more defensively. Make sure that you can get your Health Salvation online. Then start to play in the mix-up game that involves it. But yeah, don't risk your entire game plan on the ramp up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So it seems like Nehtali as a character. This is something that Snake taught me about chaos. Actually, that Nehtali as an offensive character doesn't really, or maybe it's not that she doesn't exist. Is that she's a different character when she has 5 gauge versus when she has 4. Like
Absolutely.
the presence of this card in the same way that Deep Resonance on Chaos from season 6 um changes the way that your opponent has to behave around you to the point that maybe now you can start to press an advantage and start to throw mix-ups in a way that they need to respect. Until then, their job is just to kill you before you can get there.
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. I mean, if we flip this face down and I did this whole kit without ever revealing that that card existed, we would be struggling to figure out where you're getting the value to win games.
Yeah.
Like, it's just not really there. The Hell Salvation has to exist for you to function as a character. It's
Right.
why I introduced it as the bedrock. It's the foundation. It is layer 0. Um, in Yomi and in the cake and in the parfait, as you like.
All right. Makes sense.
All right, so you have a range 1 beat sweep. You have a range 2 to yes stuns on curve. Right. It is perfectly fine to play this at range 1 if you're expecting an unguarded option that's slower than grasp. I wouldn't usually recommend it. This is also, by the way, a value delivery vehicle, which says fierce is damage.
Right.
Like, if you want, you can boost fierce at any range greater than 1, and be pretty confident that it's going to turn into damage. That's nice. That's
Whether
something a
they
lot of people
strike
don't have.
whether they strike into you or not, you're not playing the game of like, all right, I'm at range 3. I have assault and I have dive in my hand or something, or I have an on curve and an above curve option. I have a very above curve option that will
Yeah.
always work.
Yeah, I mean, they initiate with an EX at range 3, and you go, okay, nice EX assault. I'll stun that because
Right.
you have fierce in play.
Yeah. Now here's a 4 power attack.
Yeah. Which, you know, EX assault being one of my favorite normals, it wounds me, but it's really not reliable against somebody who can do this.
Right.
So you look at that fierce and you go, oh, actually, this might not be okay. But you can't tech it, so yeah, they're just going to eat it. And if they go to range 1 so that they are not threatened by this, cool, they're at range 1. As we discussed, you can play focus, you can play sweep. These
You're
are great ways to get value out of +2 power.
Yeah, you're feeling pretty good about that.
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
But yes, so it is a fierce delivery vehicle. It is also, you know, the reversal to end not quite all reversals, but most of them. And I strongly recommend bolting fierce to it as often as you can because it's nice to not have to spin the gauge, and it's even nicer to have the option.
To be able to if you need
Uh,
to, sure.
yep. This does not fill a role among the normals because the normals don't have a projectile. At range 4, dive is the thing that exists. And so the role this plays is in the projectile meta is that at range 4 you have a thing that engages with the projectile meta in a way that you otherwise wouldn't. So
Right.
that's nice because the normals don't give you a way to do that. The normals are going to lose pretty hard to Sagat if that's all you get to play against Sagat. So it's nice to have that. This does mean that very often anybody who's engaged at closer ranges for most of the game, which most people will, this is a boost, and that's fine. It's a very, very good boost. Like Hellfire, it's mostly just a boost. But it does have a purpose. It does do something that the normals don't, right? And that's what we're talking about.
Yep.
Um, Volt Damnation, ostensibly does something that the normals don't. It beats block at range 1. It doesn't do something very important that the normals don't. It barely, it only beats block at range 1. It doesn't beat much else. What it does do is it offers you a second guard 6, like a second 6 guard option, and that's
Sure.
nice
Yeah.
because there's plenty of special interactions where you want that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, having like you mentioned that Grasp in particular kind of makes Volt Damnation sad in a way that it doesn't make Sweep sad. But the 6 guard at range 1, even at a low speed, feels quite safe. And it sounds like because of how my opponent's going to be beating me up, this is another way to uh, keep life totals fairly even while I am building up to my Hell Salvation.
Exactly. And it's not even the worst wild swing for that reason, where it's like, okay, fairly often this is trading, it trades well into assault, it trades a little badly into sweep, it trades well into focus, it trades fine into a few other things in its various specials. That's nice. Um yeah, it's not the worst card. It's not doing a lot with regards to filling a role among that the normals don't, because like I said, it's mostly just the redundant sweep that is worse than sweep. But paraphrasing myself from a previous lesson, I think worse sweep is not necessarily a bad card.
Yeah, no, that's a great card.
Yeah, so yeah, it's okay. It is usable and it is at least wild swingable, which is nice when a bunch of your other stuff is not super reliable, especially at close ranges. Actually, I guess since that is the 5th special, I will now note I've mentioned a couple times this is an acceptable wild swing that this or that isn't. Your wild swings are not very reliable. This is your guardy option. Everything else is speed sensitive, and at close ranges things get real dicey. Where you go, oh, my opponent strikes at range 3. Well, assuming that I'm holding Soul Thresher, then everything loses to assault. My whole deck loses. Actually, I think everything loses to dive too. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, unless I wild swing my assaults to beat the dive, or wild swing my sweeper focus to deal with their assault. Right. So you're looking at normals. That said, you'll probably still have to wild swing fairly often to conserve resources, because you're going to be in situations where your hand is full of these things, and your hand is full of these things, and you're at range 1, and you go, okay, well, no, none of this. I'm wild swinging. None of these are good enough to play from hand at range 1. Is my assessment.
Right. So in circumstances where you have a 10 card deck and you are enough options have gone down, maybe you have some confidence in your wild swings. By default, though, your defense kind of needs to come from your hand.
Yeah, and when when you are wild swinging, you're probably doing it defensively, right?
Right.
So I guess I should say for a lot of people that's going to be, a no-brainer. But I am a player who tends to like wild swinging offensively. I consider it a viable source of my offensive play. And as Nehtali, I almost never do it. I have to be right at the bottom of that deck, and I have to know exactly what's left in it in order for that to be a good idea with Nehtali, because your cards are too disparate. Things are too divergent in their effective ranges.
The
not a
math
consistent wild
will
swinger.
just essentially never work out. There are too many things that hit at all the ranges that you're not.
Exactly.
Right.
So
Okay.
So when you wild swing, you're probably doing it for the reason that is my least favorite reason to wild swing, which is that you're just conserving resources and foregoing the strike.
Right. You're kind of noping out and saying, "I'll get him next time."
Yeah,
Okay.
you'll be playing normals from hand, or you'll be wild swinging in all likelihood, and that's fine. That's not exciting. That's not fun, but it does mean your opponent spent resources, you didn't. Cool. Take your lumps, build up, kill them later.
Right.
That's what you do.
Right. Sure. And you have an incredible way to kill them later.
You have a very good way to kill them later.
Right. Okay. Okay. So, and we've talked about how you are sort of your filler offense, your non-health or health salvation offense is largely going to be coming from the normals. You are at least part-time normals woman.
Oh yeah.
Um, Other than the specific interactions that we called out, like Spike being particularly important and Fierce being really really good on Soul Thresher, any other significant changes to the way that Nehtali plays fundamentals with her normals, or is it really just like use your normals the way that a person with good fundamentals should?
Well, I will say there's one nice thing to note. For a lot of people, these cards are always one way or the other, right? So for some people it's like this, and for some people it's like this.
Sure.
Um, where it's you're always striking assault and boosting run, or you're always striking cross and boosting backstep.
It's
Uh,
the new 13 Zangief paradigm, right?
yeah, yeah. Like one card is always a boost, one and the other one's always the attack, whichever one
Right.
is which.
Right.
Um, you don't feel that as strongly as most characters. You are fine with playing cross and backing out to range 4 or 5, especially if it's only 4. But depending on what your opponent's ranges are, you're like, okay, if they have nothing at 5, well, I'm better than them, so
Right.
that's fine.
Yeah, you have Soul Thresher.
Um, yeah, like I have so well, and at 5, if they have literally nothing, I can just hit them for damage.
Oh, true. Yeah, this also says attacks at range 5 don't hit you. Parentheses if your opponent has no attacks that hit at
If
range
they don't
5.
have any, yeah, if they don't have any, it's like, all right,
Right.
cool.
Okay.
Um, and if they duck in, they probably do it with dive, and then they're at range 2, and you know what? That's generally
That sounds
fine.
great to you.
Yeah, like the reason not to do that is because you want to play Soul Exchange. But if it's free value, it's free value.
Right.
Um, one way or the other, it's going to be value. And then as for assaults, if they don't play a counterattack, then you are likely winning that strike. Like they are not super likely to cross out against you, depending on what range you're coming at. But like losing to cross is not a super high value loss. It's generally fine. I would say if they do play a counterattack into assault, that's one fewer that they have to deal with your other stuff. You are especially like the way that your assault will usually lose is it runs into focus, and that means that focus can't later beat Azazel's Torment, so that's fine. Um, like you still have advantage here. This is a bad trade, but it's a bad trade that everybody in the game is going to eat sometimes. Um, and it means that one focus is down, and depending on what they have, depending on what boost they have in focus, that may be more or less valuable to you because you really don't want to deal with reading. Um, Scramble is a strike that you will probably lose, but a strike that you were probably going to lose anyway by wild swinging, so they just spent a gauge on it for no reason, and it's fine. Um, but yeah, like, and if they play a sweep at range 1, that's like you play assaults, they play sweep. That's much less good. You would much rather beat that with Azazel. That is in fact you losing the mix up. But I think assault running into block or focus is totally fine for you.
Right.
But yeah, and backstep is of course like going, oh, they don't have a range game, I'll go to range. Same principle as cross. Like you have range play, and even against real zoners, quote unquote, at range 4, you have range play that makes them very frustrated, um, because you have two incredibly annoying range tools. Even though you are not what I would consider to be a true zoner, you're not somebody who wins at range. You're somebody who can prevent other people from winning at range.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, ideally, you are using your range tools to force your opponent to come into range 2, where you can
Mhm.
destroy them.
Yeah, and they're going to instead come into range 1 or maybe 3, at which point you get to play some neutral, you get to play some normals, you get to play Clutch of Evil and destroy them anyway.
Right, and then you
Um,
drag them to your preferred range, and then they die.
mhm. Yep.
Okay. So mostly then normals are normal. It's just that normals are I'm crutching on them a little bit harder, and I really need to use them well because that's kind of what I got
Yeah, that's
for
what you got.
70+% of the game as I'm filling in the gaps where I can with my sort of little value adds with my specials, and then I drop a nuke on them.
I would say for 60% of the game.
Okay.
Because 18 out of 30 is 60%.
Fair. I was also including like uh specials, boosts, things like that, but like the
Oh, well,
normals
sure, fair enough.
are damage wise
I, I,
definitely it's
I was
probably going
just
to be
I was
about
just
that
going
much.
like yeah. So they have 18 life. So that means you need to make 18 life with
Yep.
the rest of your game.
Yep. Yeah, no,
Um,
that's a good way to think about it because you it is going to be tough for them to not get hit by any health salvation.
yeah, you've got
Right.
two of them. If they knock out one, then you probably still have the other one. If they like the thing that is bad that can happen is that they block one because you got the mix up wrong.
Right.
Like play enough spikes that becomes extremely hard for them to do. Play enough spikes that they parry this, and then oh yeah, and I will note this. Your reshuffle timing. You will probably reshuffle sooner than a lot of characters, depending on when your first deck runs out. Your first deck has run out when 2 Health Salvation, uh, one or more of these each are in your discard pile. Like these are so important that like even if you both have like, oh, I don't know, well, I'll say 18 life, you may well consider reshuffling.
Right.
Um, like these plus focus are the highest value cards in your kit, and that's just because focus is focus and it's high value for everyone.
And yeah, it's always great. But so not being able to boost these, not
Not
being
being
able
able
to
to threaten
throw.
this attack, not
Oh
being able
yeah, the
to
attack
threaten
as
this
well.
attack.
Yeah.
Yeah, both
Um,
sides of this boost, especially on this attack on this attack on this.
Hell Salvation, obviously, right?
Yep.
Um, it occurs to me that I think this will probably be a pretty short addendum to the lesson. It occurs to me we didn't actually talk about building power, the boost. I think we can probably continue to not talk about building power.
Oh no, there's a perfectly good use case for this. Uh, you have 2 or 3 cards left in your deck, and you don't have 5 gauge. So you boost this. Uh, you draw 2, you add one of them to your gauge, and then you either draw, and then this goes to your discard pile, and then you either draw your last card or then you proc the reshuffle so that this is back in your deck.
Okay.
Um, but the problem with building power is that it puts Hell Salvation in your discard pile. So the only time I would ever boost it is if it doesn't put Hell Salvation in your discard pile.
If you're just about to reshuffle anyway.
Yeah, like it's literally going to be in your deck. This next turn is the time that it's okay to boost it. Um, because it's far too important an attack to have available. Like you don't
Right.
want this to go into your discard pile voluntarily.
Right. Okay. Makes sense.
So
So,
yeah, it has exactly that use case in my opinion.
okay. Yep, I get you. So that is the kit. That's everything that I've got. I've got my normals, I got my specials. I mostly got my normals, and I got Hell Salvation.
Hmm.
Any other strategic considerations that we want to talk about, or should we go into counterplay?
Um, Can't think of any in particular. I'm gonna make explicit. So when earlier I said like learning Nehtali taught me kind of how to view a kid, it was specifically because you need to learn how to use your tools to supplement your normals because so much of your play is normals oriented. I do think that means, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself because this is kind of what we do at the end of the lesson, but I do think it means Nehtali is a great choice for a character to pick up. Being able to play Nehtali effectively means that you are developing strong fundamentals. She is
Right.
extremely fundamentals reliant. Like her gimmick is Hell Salvation exists and that shapes everything. But the ways to deal with it are all in themselves fundamentals related, and also the rest of the game happens without it, and you are going to have to deal with that. And I think like figuring out how to use the very narrow tool set that you are given to supplement a normals game that needs to be strong enough to make 18 life, disappear.
Right.
I think that builds really strong skills.
I mean, we also we have a sample size of one in this, to my knowledge, a sample size of one in this
I
particular
say,
experiment. But
sure, I'm not literally the only Natalia player. I'm just, I don't know who else played her in tournament.
at the very least, though, Nehtali was among your first characters, one of your very first like real projects on Exceed, and like
The first character I set out to learn.
yeah, and D, you're a very good player. Like
Thank you.
there is a perfect 1-to-1 correlation, as far as I can tell, between picking up Nehtali and learning to play like D. So at the very least, there's something there. I think
Yeah.
that having a character who is training wheels is the wrong word because she doesn't help you. But
Um.
she's a very cruel master. She will teach
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
whether you're ready or not.
Yep. Okay. But yeah. Uh. So correspondingly, then there, I'll make it a segue. Now it's a segue.
Excellent.
Counterplay. Means the dealing with the specific things that she does well, and then just playing strong fundamentals against her. Right.
Right.
So if your character has their own unique gimmick that is whatever they do that is particularly good, emphasize that as strongly as you can, and get as much value out as you can. Expect that you will eat this. Try not to, but like I said earlier, right? She's going to make it so that either you can't avoid it, or if you could have avoided it, you just eat something else and then you eat it anyway.
Right.
And so you eat, take 17 instead of 12. Oops. Um, like make her work for it. Don't hand it over. If you have parry at, but wait until she has at least 5 gauge. By the way, don't parry early because you don't want to miss a parry and then not have that block available to you. Consider also playing block, but be aware that she may well have a spike or a Volt Damnation to punish your block. Engage with that entire mix-up. Engage with the Yomi layers. Except that you will still lose a bunch of value when this comes up or when she plays the other sides of the mix-up and punishes you for it. That's fine. You have 18 life, she has 30, but your kid is probably going to get you more value than the rest of her kid put together. Because this is where her value is.
Right.
So, emphasize whatever your character is strong at and outplay her in fundamentals. You like cornering her. She does not super love being right here. Playing focus at range 1 tends to be awesome against her, by the way. She has nothing that she can do about it. This is where she can clutch a Evil U to 2, but as I said, this is going to happen at some point. Like, whether it happens here, or out here, or out here, you have some control over deciding the exact timing. Making her pay for this, and then still being able to play a block can make this mix-up really painful for her, because she hates to do this and then play Spike. Like, if she does this and beats your block, she won the mix-up. But now she doesn't have this. She has to play the other copy to do it again.
Now
you will.
Now you can pretty safely just hug range 1 or range 3.
Yeah, like now you go to the other range, and now she has to wait for the other one to come up or pay even more resources if she already had it. And then she's out her hand, and she hit you for 17, but she has 0 resources, and you can bully her because she does not really have much to do at close ranges other than play normals, and she's wild swinging if she's out that many resources. You also similarly, by the way, you're going to eat this boost. Like it's going to hit you. You can't do anything about it. Don't be super reliant on your first gauge. Like be aware that this exists and don't get tilted.
Right.
That is the only advice I can offer about dealing with this. It's going to happen. It's unreactable. That's how it works. Don't bother parrying it. Your blocks are too important. Just let it go, and then keep rolling. Oh, I guess I should note this, by the way. If you have this boost in your kit, this is actually really annoying for her to deal with because it means Soul Thresher is dead. This attack suddenly becomes worthless.
Yeah, even Fierce Soul Thresher can't stun
Doesn't break
it. Can't stun a defend.
Yeah. So if you have this boost or Faultless Defense, for which is +4 guard, so it's the same total number of defense. They're both fantastic even against Fierce. If Fierce is not in play, then you can just throw Dust Defense. I think that's what it's called. Yeah.
The
3 armor, now strike.
Yes, on sweep, yes.
Yeah, like if you absolutely have to cover Soul Thresher, sure. Go for it. Play those things, and then Soul Thresher is just not a threat. And you can get your assault in, get your advantage, go to range 1, punch her in the face a bunch.
Right.
Yeah, you will very often be punching her in the face at range 1 because that's the range where Soul Thresher is not a thing that she's likely to be able to play against you, or certainly not likely to want to play against you.
Right.
And that is fine.
Does my opponent also kind of need to? We mentioned this earlier when I said that like the counterplay is sort of baked into the lesson. You said that realistically, your opponent won't let you have Heaven's Punishment because they won't be building to that much gauge. Is that also just sort of baked into the counterplay? Like a
Yes.
person who's playing against Nehtali probably needs to learn to operate at low to middling amounts of gauge.
Yes, and you're right. I should mention that explicitly here. So, so I hate to put it this way, but counterplay to Nehtali's big game plan points is a series of knowledge checks, right? Where you're going, do you remember this? Do you know this? If not, you die.
Right.
So the first one is Hell Salvation. You have to be aware that this exists, and you have to get used to the pattern of playing against it in footsies, and then dealing with the mix-ups that come along with that. Once you have done that, right, you get to play the rest of the game, and you will have to be aware that you must not allow yourself to eat this for no reason, and you probably don't want to eat this for no reason. This is the big one. This is the one that can be, oops, 8-10 power. Game is over.
Right.
I meant 8 to 10, not 18. 8 to 10. Anyway, like I said, it could hit that, but it's probably not going to.
It's probably not going to happen. Yeah, outside of that one Hakumen game.
Yes. And be cautious of this because she does have more action compression than most season 1 characters. Like we see multiple strike boosts. This is a thing where you can be like, okay, I'm at range 1. This is fine. I have grasp. I have cross. Like I'm near the wall, but I've got enough room for cross to retreat. And then she boosts this, and now you don't have room to back away, and you can't be faster than her, and she just destroys you. Right. So be cognizant of her shift you around and strike boosts, both of them, when you're thinking about Hell Salvation. Heaven's Punishment, most characters you want to counterplay just by using your gauge pretty regularly. right? Like throw your ultras when you get them. You know, if you are somebody who wants to exceed by spinning meter, if you're not a Under Night character, like do that at your earliest convenience, and then be wary of your ranges. Where try not to just eat this for, especially for 8 or more. Like at 6, it's generally worth her playing, and she's getting what she's paying for it. At 8, she's getting more than she's paying for it, and you don't want to give it to her.
Right. Okay.
Like that's about where that is. And then if she's hitting you for 2 or for 4 or for 0, then it's probably fine. Like it's you would rather not she not be hitting you at all, but given that she's spending 3 gauge to hit you, sure, you can take 2 or 4 damage.
Right.
Especially if you're trading, although it's pretty hard to trade with this. But yeah, for most characters, by the way, if you like this, if you I just put it this way, for every character in the game, uh, you can spend Gage's Force. And if you need to stay in her face to avoid getting murdered by Hell's Salvation or Heaven's Punishment, there's a perfectly good action called the Walk action, formerly known as the Move action, where you pay Force to move around the board. Go ahead and take that action. If you have Force expenditures or Force costs, sorry, on your cards, if you're playing a Blaze Blue character, for example, I'm sure you can find a use for Force.
Sure.
There are so many Force costs in that season.
Sure. So you might not be able to hit with your big crazy game plan ultra, but having to spend your gauge is not counterplay. It's another. I'm sorry. It's another game plan. Having Nehtali forcing her opponent to spend their gauge is not gonna incredibly inconvenience them outside of a few circumstances. They're probably fine to do that.
I'm trying to explain ways you can do this that benefit you in case it's something that you're not used to doing.
Sure.
Right? If you're somebody who's used to, like, it doesn't matter how much gauge I have right this very minute unless I'm playing an ultra or exceeding or something. Like you actually need to be aware of that with Nehtali. You do need to not get, your head ripped off by these gigantic attacks that punish you for not paying attention.
Right.
But
It's like you have enough to worry about with Hell Salvation. Don't fall in the traps as well.
Don't let her have those. So that's the knowledge check, is like, are you keeping your own gauge under control? And the most common, like the universal ways to do that, are change cards and walk, where you can pay Force to do stuff, to just move around, draw new cards, whatever. That's a perfectly good way to get rid of gauge if you don't have something that you specifically want to spend gauge on. I think most characters, I would say, are likely to have better things to spend their gauge on that they really want to spend specifically gauge on, not just Force.
Right.
But since gauge can be spent as Force, please, don't hold out for your 8 gauge ultra and then die. Like,
and then explode. Right.
yeah. Generally, you don't want to have more than 4 gauge if you're going to get if you don't have an attack that beats Heaven's Punishment, where you know that you'll be safe playing it, even if she does one of these things.
Right.
Then you don't want to give her the payout on Heaven's Punishment.
Right. Okay.
Does that all make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. And then the rest of it is just what I described during the lesson itself. Is don't eat this. Try not to eat it. You will eat it. That's fine. Beat her up the rest of the time as well as you possibly can. Leverage your own strengths, whatever they may be, which is not the most useful matchup advice, but all the matchup advice is kind of condensed into don't give her the value on the things that she specifically has that give her value.
Right.
And then accept that she's going to get value for free, but her card quality, that is to say the typical value generated by her actual attacks, is very low. So she's going to be normals reliant, knowing that can play against normals and play your own specials, which hopefully are a little less normals reliant.
You can realistically race her from 30 life to 0 life when you only have 18.
Yes.
Okay. Just not when you have 6.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Like it's you getting knocked out 12 is a problem, but it's one that you can manage. Getting knocked out 24 is you're dead. And then the 17 is definitely the middle ground, where it's like, well, if you ate the spike and then the Hell Salvation, that really sucked. You want to try to not eat both of them in a row. And that's generally a matter of mitigating well, of going, okay, well, if I used my block, force her to use Clutch of Evil or something. Force her to use a trick to hit you. Don't just stand at range 2 and let her hit you.
Right.
And then when she does use that trick to hit you, that's one fewer of that left. And if she used it on Spike, then she doesn't. Then she, has to use the other on Hell Salvation, and you can make that. You can keep getting in her face. You can make that more expensive for her. You can start looking at parries and readings if you have access to those, which not everybody does. But yeah, make it rough for her.
All right, makes sense. And then, so we frequently talk about other characters who play a little bit like Nehtali, but really quick before that, if you would
Mhm.
be willing to theory craft with me, D, and imagine that Nehtali has stepped out of a time warp and has appeared in Modern Exceed.
Mhm.
Um, what does she look like? What does her like? I guess how much of her game plan was influenced by the sort of uniqueness of the metagame that she was brought up in, the Red Horizon Season 1 meta. Does she play differently? Does she become appreciably a different character into more recent characters?
In my opinion, yes. In that, I think specifically up through season 2, um, I could actually find excuses to use this ability or this succeed mode in the occasional game and not feel like it was uh, a taunt or a meme. Um, like there were times that I definitely did that unironically
Right.
and felt like it worked. Season 2 is like notoriously, I think, probably the slowest paced season of Exceed. Um, although it may, your mouse may vary. Not every character is created equal. Um, Seasons 5 and 7 in particular, 7 in particular, no, you're not giving gauge.
Ever.
You're not giving resources to season 5, and you're not giving gauge to season 7.
Right.
It's a bad idea.
Right.
In my experience, you can give resources to season 6 because they generate so much of their own that the difference is relatively like it's less dramatic. Um, it's still dicey to spend the turns though. Like I wouldn't even consider the turns or the resources for seasons 5 or 7. With 6, I would consider the resources, but not so much the turns to
Not the
be a thing that I
turns.
could afford to give up.
Right.
So it's dicey. But that already has influenced my opinion of her. I mean, if it's not obvious from how I described her, I'm already of the opinion that you're almost never going to get the chance to do this because I have
Sure.
been playing that. I still play Nehtali. I played her last week.
Yeah, you
Um,
you mentioned like the two specific games that you called out as being demonstrative of Nehtali things is one was against Reese, a season 1 character. The other one was against Hakumen, not a season 1 character. Like the
yeah, and I was playing against last week.
Sure.
Um,
The lesson that you've given is taking into account the realities of modern Exceed. This is not a historical lesson.
Correct.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Cool.
mean, if anything, I would say that Natalie is better than she used to be, specifically in one regard. Darkness Barrier is more relevant now than it was in season 1 because the fireball meta, the projectile interactions in Exceed are more developed now than they used to be, and this card is actually more significant than it used to be.
Okay.
Um, Heaven's Punishment is also a teensy bit better by the same token, where like these are actually good into the projectile meta in a lot of situations, and in season 1 they weren't.
They were not useful.
They were much less useful. There were things that they beat, but they were way more situational.
Right. I mean,
Um,
Heaven's Punishment is not a fast fireball in a kit where Soul Thresher exists, for example, but there's a lot of speed 7 fireballs in season 1.
there's not a lot of speed 7s.
Oh,
There's a good number of speed 5s.
yeah, there's a
Uh,
lot of big crazy projectiles, I guess I should say.
yeah, there's lots of outside stats, and there's not as many mid speeds,
Right.
at least among the projectile meta, right? So like there's speed 5 stuff that hits range 4, shows up a fair number of places. There is one other speed 7 projectile. It's not a common thing at all though.
Okay.
Two others if you count Juno, but Juno's Juno.
Yeah, Juno. Yeah,
Um,
honestly, it might my impression here might be because I fairly recently had a Juno lesson, so I might
oh
be including that.
yeah, no,
That's fair.
Juno and Kaden, who I think you've done both
Yes,
of those already, right?
I have.
Yeah, they're
Yeah,
the other two.
and I haven't done that many season 1 lessons, so I think I'm going from a kind of a corrupted sample size here. No, but fair
Yes,
point
yeah.
that the projectile meta has changed in a way that has made these cards more relevant.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's that.
Okay. And then finally, if I'm talking to a person like me who came up on more modern Exceed, and you found out that they were a player who played a certain character, and you really wanted to recommend Nehtali to them, who would be who you what was a main that you would be looking for to recommend Nehtali to?
Oh, you got me. You asked the question backwards. I wasn't expecting that.
I did, yeah. I
Um,
also kind of butchered it a little bit, so thank you for knowing what I'm talking about. What other characters play like Nehtali?
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I was expecting you to be like, okay, uh, if you like Natali, then who should you look at? But of course, this is the reverse. This is a season one character. We're not expecting people to be as common as versed in. So it's like, oh,
Right.
who if you play these characters, would you like Natali? Well, um, okay, so I'll put it this way: if watching this lesson made you excited about something, and then you found out that Natali wasn't that at all, and you were disappointed,
Hmm.
then what you want is the gauge monster, um, which is an archetype of character where you actually build all the gauge you could ever want and lord it over people. Which Natali doesn't really do. Natali looks like she wants to build a million gauge. She in fact wants to build, enough, um, and then she spends it. Gauge monsters are a thing, however. They totally exist. Hakumen, which we already discussed earlier, is somebody who can build gauge every turn. That's his last roll. That's Hakumen. Um, just by playing neutral. He if he doesn't strike, he gets gauge. So he can have a million gauge, and he can also use it on some pretty fancy stuff, as you can see from the 8 gauge over here.
Right.
Um, and that is a card he can realistically play. By the way, that's not a meme. That's very much an attack he can play.
Yeah, that's a very legitimate attack.
hmm Um, But yeah, so if you like the idea of hoarding monstrous amounts of gauge, you got Hakumen, you got Bison, who also can build gauge. He has to actually like take an action for it, but he definitely can. Um, let's see, it's 3, 5. Let me move forward. Season 6 actually tends to get gauge more easily as a whole. However, it's there's a lot. It's harder for me to generalize, and I don't actually know of a specific character I would describe as being this kind of. You're all about building up a ton of gauge and doing a ton with all that gauge. Like all the characters I'm thinking of are specific thresholds for specific reasons. Like
Right.
Hyde builds a ton of gauge, but he actually cares what's in his gauge, which is a different kind of feeling. It's not just the resource game.
Right. The comparison to sort of de facto Natalia, not fantasy Natalie, that I mentioned is that the way that Snake plays chaos and the way that he talks about chaos, where when you have four
That makes
gauges
sense.
chaos, you get deep resonance, and that makes your opponent play differently.
That makes sense. So I'm not a chaos main. I have played a decent amount of chaos. I like him fairly well, and a lot of what I like about him, I think, is what I like about Natali, which is that I have like very specific tools, which are kind of niche, which fill specific roles in between where the normals lie,
Right.
and then everything else is just hard fundamentals. And my specific tools are important. I've got some movement oriented. The boost on this. What's the phrase? Um, Action compression. There we go. Um, and other ways to manipulate board state. So like these boosts I make bank on when I
Yep.
play chaos. And then attacks that fill roles among the normals, which go plug that other lesson. I haven't actually seen it, but I
Sure.
have
Yeah.
a lot of faith in Snake's ability. So,
Yeah. I know Snake's a great
uh,
player, and for comparison, uh, these two cards are not quite the same. But in
no,
terms of how they make your opponent say, "Oh, I can't stand at this range," and
yeah,
whenever you are at a range, you can put a card down, and your opponent needs to play differently when you have a gauge threshold. That's kind of how Snake plays Chaos. Is he throws that card the way that you're describing throwing Hell Salvation.
that makes perfect sense. Um, let's see who else. Let's see. I wouldn't. So there's a lot of ways. There's a lot of fundamentals in season 7. A lot of characters who emphasize in different ways. There's nobody that I think like really is like Natali in that whole set. However, in the Strive season, because characters tend to be pretty oriented around whatever their unique thing is. Um, like I think the most if to put it the worst way I could, right? I think the blandest character in Strive is Kai.
Right.
Um, and like I still think that looking at Kai and going, "Oh, Ride the Lightning is a card," and I sure do have Stun Dipper, and I can also move all the time. Like gives him more spice than for me to be able to say that he's just filling in gaps and he's just playing normals.
Right.
Like he really is more than that. Um, so if you're excited by raw normals, raw fundamentals and lots of normals, and then occasionally big dumb ultra, um, good news. Find a character with big dumb ultra, and you can play them that way. Every
True.
character in Exceed supports playing normals. Um, Axel's a little bit weird actually, but most characters in Exceed support playing normals, and big dumb ultras are fairly common. Season 1 as a whole has a lot of big dumb ultras. If you saw 212-7 and you're like, that's the reason I'm playing this character, and nothing, and the rest of the session washed over you because you
Right.
saw 212-7, then here's 313. That's not that. Sorry, here's 313.
Yep.
And sorry if it's a spoiler. I don't know if you remember if you've done Bilcore yet, but that's 313-7, and it's every bit as good as 212-7, as it turns out. So, you know, that's maybe the other most notable. Here's my big dumb 5 gauge ultra. You will die.
Just deal with
Um,
it. Right. Marathi has Shadow of Death at range 1, right?
yep,
Y-
115.8. Um, the biggest, the dumbest of the big dumb ultras.
Yeah. So if that's what you want, maybe just go check out season 1 in general. And the play patterns that those ultras encourage, where like there's a lot of footsies, there's a lot of like,
Mhm.
you can't be here, so be here instead, is very sort of archetypal, or at least stereotypical of Red Horizon play.
Yeah, it's very much it's a lot about neutral, it's a lot about footsies. We called it the footsie season before season 3 came out.
Sure.
Um, and even then, there's a lot of footsies in it. Um, big dumb ultras and favorite ranges that are hard to get to and very rewarding also tends to exemplify grapplers. I had never actually thought of Nehtali as a grappler before you brought it up, because I think Nehtali neutral does not really look like the grapple. Like Nehtali is so often going to be like tapping you to build up a little value and make a little space and do something a little bit safe and playing low risk. That like it doesn't feel like the grappler to me, because for me the grappler is I throw the big mix up, and she doesn't do that very often. She becomes that when she has 5 gauge, right?
Right.
Um, but if you like throwing haymakers at specific ranges and you don't mind wading through grappler hell, which is neutral, um, then there's lots of fun grapplers. I actually love Imogene, and she is a range 2 grappler, not a range 1 grappler, um, from season 2. She's a more modern character. Potemkin is very, very range 1. Let's see. Trying to think if there's any other. Yeah. I tend to think that Wagner is also a fairly like plays a lot of neutral, but Wagner does not really have the big dumb ultra in the same way.
Right.
Um, yeah, and the other big dumb ultras tend to have much more obvious ways to mitigate. So like we talked about Ryu, who has Metsu Shoryuken, which is a 178. Hazama also has a 178, by the way. 178 is a really fantastic stat line. Range 1, power 7, speed 8. That's horrifying. Still loses to focus. Um, if you want an ultra that beats literally everything, then you kind of have to go back to season 1. It's not a very common thing to be able to get
Right.
beyond that.
All right. Makes sense. Well,
All right.
that's a
Haven't
that's
thought
a
of anything else.
that's a great roster of characters. Odds are you can find somebody to, it's a wide net of people, but at the same time, maybe not everybody is going to be into Natali. Um,
Hmm.
I do think though that for people who are not well versed in season are not well versed in season 1, and who maybe like me came into Exceed a little bit later, and sees some of these characters and hears what people say about them, and hears that Natali is kind of considered to be a non-viable or a difficult to play character, or difficult to find success with character, give her another look, because
Hmm.
I I was one of those people, and I'm not going to make a claim that she's a hidden top tier, but she's a lot more interesting than I gave her credit for, and I'm glad to know that. So if you are like me, viewers at home, and anything that you heard about this character interested you, go try her out. She's cool.
Yeah, she's awesome. She has 212-7. She has a bunch of interesting little tools to supplement strong normals play, and you know what? Strong normals play is really, really satisfying.
Yeah,
It feels great.
turns out Exceed is a fun game, and if you play a lot of Exceed, it's a fun time.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Would recommend.
absolutely. Well, Dee, thank you so much. This has been awesome. Really appreciate your time as always. Anything else you wanted to mention before we wrap it up?
Give me one sec. I feel like I was thinking of something. Oh yeah, okay, right. So part of Natali's promise was the promise of power, where you kind of offer something and you take it away, or you cheat, lie, and steal. Um, that does exist in a couple places. It's fairly uncommon. Um, but there are boosts that literally do that. The opponent has plus X power, and then something else,
Right.
right? So those boosts I wanted to give an honorable mention to. One is on Taisei, um, who is a character who starts with half as much life as you, and that's fine because he'll be dealing like twice as much damage as you. Um, one is on Kokonoe, uh, who is another of my favorites, but she has a boost that gives her a bunch of gauge and gives you a bunch of power, and she's going to try to make sure that you don't actually get to use that power. Um, one is Sea Viper, who is by far the most rushed down of these. Sea Viper does not actually play anything like Nehtali, but if you want to do the thing where you give your opponent something, there's the boost.
Right. They're stylish.
Um, like that boost is infamous for good reason. It is a fantastic boost. It's way stronger than it looks. Um,
Yeah.
and
Viper needs
properly
to draw
used,
cards really bad.
yeah, that draw 3 is worth so much.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, she has the most card draw in season 3, like up there with most card draw in the game, depending on how you count it. And she needs all of it, and she makes extremely good use of it.
Right.
And then I think the last one, at least unless my memory is failing me, which it very well could be, is Chip Zenith, who has the opponent has +3 power, which are an absolute lie.
Right.
The opponent will not be able to make use of that power.
Right. I
Um,
guess the other character who does something a little bit similar, not on a boost, is Akuma,
oh,
who
thank you. Yes.
if you are playing Akuma in the sort of like standard defensive set play mode, hopefully you are never getting hit by an opponent who has +2 or +3 power.
Yep. Yeah. These all say, in theory, the opponent has a bunch of extra power, and they all say in secrets, but actually,
Right.
um, where there's some sort of very important caveat, uh, which it's it's the most lie with Chip, and then Akuma, and then Viper, and then it might actually be true with these two, depending on how you play, because they don't give you another action.
Right.
Um, but yeah, so okay, yeah, so that's the like, uh, Natali offers some things that she actually isn't, but that gameplay can exist and exceed. And if you want to just take people's resources away and make them sad because you're a sadist, then play Eugenia.
True.
Um,
Yeah, that's what she's here for.
yeah, there you go. So if you like playing Soul Exchange and that's the only thing you like about Natali, play Eugenia. Um, Eugenia does not hit gauge, but she hits hand. So,
Which also feels bad.
which also feels bad.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, I think that's all I got.
Well, great. Uh, Again, excellent roster of characters. Try these guys out if you haven't already. Try Nehtali out if you haven't already. D,
Try
seriously, thank you so much
everybody.
for your time.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for letting me talk about my mains. Still a character that I greatly enjoy.
Of course, it's always great. Folks at home, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. I will see you all for the next one. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye. Oh, stay hydrated.
Stay hydrated, please.